And there are people like that who sort of are in a way lonely. And loneliness is a very sad thing. What a blessing he is, because we do this together, you know. I could never do it.
In an era where Hollywood manufactured perfection, one woman didn't just fit the fantasy, she became it. Audrey Hepburn wasn't just a star, she was a feeling, a quiet kind of magic the world couldn't look away from. From the moment she lit up the screen in Roman Holiday to her iconic elegance in Breakfast at Tiffany's, she didn't just play roles, she defined an era. To millions, her life looked like a fairy tale written in diamonds, laughter, and spotlight. But behind the glow, there was another story. A story of love that cut deep, of marriages that couldn't hold, of a heart that gave everything and still carried something unfinished. Because long after the cameras stopped rolling, long after the applause faded, there was one love she never truly left behind. And sometimes, the most powerful love stories don't happen under bright lights. They happen in the silence when no one is watching. The love story Hollywood was never meant to tell. Audrey Hepburn and William Holden, two stars orbiting the same set, but destined to never truly collide. In the early 1950s, Audrey wasn't yet the legend the world would come to worship. She was still carrying the quiet scars of war-torn Europe, stepping into Hollywood not with ambition blazing, but with a soft, unshakable grace that set her apart from everyone else. She didn't crave the spotlight, not really. Beneath the elegance and rising fame, Audrey wanted something almost ordinary, a calm life, real love, a family to call her own. Then came 1953, Sabrina, the film that would change everything. Overnight, she became unforgettable, captivating audiences, redefining beauty, and stepping into global stardom. But while the world watched her shine on screen, something far more intimate, far more complicated was quietly taking shape behind the scenes. A connection, a feeling, the beginning of a romance that, from the very start, was never meant to survive. It didn't begin with a grand gesture. It began with a glance that lingered just a second too long. That was the moment she met William Holden. By then, Holden wasn't just another actor. He was Hollywood royalty, confident, magnetic, and effortlessly in control. He moved through the chaos of fame like a man who had already mastered it. To Audrey, still finding her footing under the blinding lights of sudden stardom, he felt like something rare, steady, safe. On set, the connection was undeniable. Laughter came easily. Conversations refused to end. Long after the cameras stopped rolling, they stayed, talking, smiling, forgetting the world outside. What started as something innocent began to shift quietly into something deeper, the kind of romance that doesn't need to be announced because everyone can feel it. And she did. For Audrey, it was real. But reality had a cruel edge. Holden wasn't free. He had a wife, a life already built beyond the reach of what they were becoming. And then came the truth that shattered everything even more completely. Years earlier, he had made a decision that could never be undone. He could never have children. For Audrey, it wasn't just heartbreaking, it was final. Because behind the elegance, the fame, the fairy tale image the world adored, her greatest dream was simple: to be a mother. And in that moment, she understood something devastating. No matter how deeply she loved him, there was no future where they could both be happy. She chose to walk away, even though every part of her wanted to stay. Because sometimes, the kind of love that feels the most real is the one fate quietly refuses to let survive. The heartbreak didn't explode. It lingered, soft, heavy, unforgettable. And as that chapter with William Holden closed, a new one began. Not with fireworks, but with something far more dangerous: hope. Then came the man who seemed like the answer, Mel Ferrer. After the quiet ache she carried, Audrey Hepburn turned back to the one thing she could control: her work. And Hollywood, it was no longer just noticing her, it was opening completely. But fame was never the dream. Not really. Behind the applause, behind the elegance, behind that unforgettable smile, Audrey wanted something simple, something lasting, a place to feel safe. And then, Mel. He wasn't just another name in the industry. He was different, thoughtful, intense. A man who didn't just perform art, he lived lived inside it. Actor, director, a mind that moved deeper than the surface. With him, conversations didn't stay shallow. They wandered into books, into ideas, into meaning. While others spoke about roles and reputation, they spoke about purpose, about creation, about life itself. And for Audrey, that kind of connection didn't just feel rare, it felt like home. For Audrey, it didn't feel like just another romance, it felt like rescue. In 1954, she married Mel Ferrer in a quiet Swiss ceremony, far from the noise of Hollywood. To the world, Audrey Hepburn had finally found her safe place, someone who understood the spotlight without being consumed by it, someone gentle enough for her fragile heart. And for a moment, it was real. They didn't just love each other, they built together. He directed her in Undine, a role that would earn her a Tony Award and cement her brilliance beyond the screen. Side by side, they looked untouchable, elegant, composed, the very image of a perfect Hollywood union. Then, in 1960, everything shifted. She became a mother. When her son Sean was born, Audrey found a deeper kind of joy, one no spotlight could ever replicate. Friends noticed it immediately. The restless star softened. The woman who had spent years surviving finally looked at peace. But peace doesn't always last. Behind the flawless photos and carefully held smiles, something began to fracture, slowly, quietly, almost invisibly. The long filming schedules, the constant distance, the unspoken pressures of two ambitious lives, they didn't explode overnight. They lingered. They stretched the silence between them until it became something heavier than love. From the outside, they were still perfect, but inside the marriage, the distance had already begun. Whispers don't destroy a marriage overnight. They erode it slowly until there's nothing left but silence. In the shadows of Audrey Hepburn's seemingly perfect life, rumors of jealousy and quiet disagreements began to spread through Hollywood's inner circles. Nothing explosive, nothing public, just enough to fracture what once felt unbreakable. After 14 years together, her marriage to Mel Ferrer finally collapsed in 1968. Some love stories don't end with a storm. They simply fade until one day there's nothing left to hold on to. And once again, Audrey found herself searching for something she had chased her whole life: peace. Then came the promise of a new beginning. After the heartbreak, she stepped into a quieter, more reflective chapter. Hollywood still wanted her. The scripts kept coming. The spotlight still waited. But Audrey, the woman who lit up the world, was slowly turning away from it, because what she wanted now wasn't fame. It was a life that felt real. Fate answered in the most unexpected place: a Mediterranean cruise in 1968. That was where she met Andrea Dotti. He wasn't a movie star. He wasn't part of the Hollywood machine. He was calm, intelligent, grounded, a man who lived far from the chaos she had known. And to Audrey, that difference felt like safety, like home. For the first time in years, it felt like she could start again. In 1969, they married quietly in Rome. No spectacle, no noise, just a hopeful beginning. Friends watched closely, quietly wishing that this time it would last, that this would finally be the life she had always longed for. Private, stable, untouched by the pressures that had broken her before. Soon after, she gave birth to their son Luca, and just like that, everything shifted. Motherhood became her world again. She traded film sets for quiet mornings, applause for lullabies, the bright chaos of Hollywood for the stillness of life in Italy and Switzerland. For a while, it seemed like she had finally found it, the peace she had been searching for all along. The second chance wasn't supposed to end like this. For a brief moment, life with Audrey Hepburn felt steady, almost like the peace she had spent years chasing was finally within reach. But slowly, almost invisibly, that fragile calm began to fracture. Whispers crept in first. Then came the rumors, quiet, persistent, impossible to fully ignore, that Andrea Dotti was involved with other women. At first, Audrey held on. She had already known heartbreak, already felt what it meant to lose something she believed in. This time, she wanted to fight for it. She wanted it to last. But hope can only stretch so far before reality begins to tear through it. The distance between them didn't explode. It grew, quietly, painfully, until it became something neither of them could pretend wasn't there. By the early 1980s, the silence said everything. The marriage was over. Another ending, another love that began with promise and faded into goodbye. For Audrey, Audrey, the pain wasn't new, but that didn't make it easier, because sometimes the most heartbreaking truth is this: not every fresh start leads somewhere better. So she stepped away. By the late 1970s, Audrey Hepburn had already lived a life most could only dream of, lighting up the screen in classics like Roman Holiday, Sabrina, and Breakfast at Tiffany's. She was elegance, she was grace, she was Hollywood at its most timeless. But fame had lost its shine. After her marriage to Dotti came to an end, Audrey made a choice that surprised many, but made perfect sense to her. She turned away from the spotlight, from the cameras, from the noise, and chose something quieter, something real. She chose her children, because after all the applause faded, after all the love stories came and went, the only thing Audrey truly wanted was peace. Long after the applause faded and the spotlight dimmed, Audrey Hepburn discovered something far more powerful than fame: silence, motherhood, and purpose. She would later say that raising her children gave her a deeper joy than any Oscar or standing ovation ever could. In a world that once demanded everything from her, she chose instead to give everything to her two sons, Sean and Luca, determined to build for them the kind of safe, loving childhood she herself had been denied. The glamour didn't vanish overnight. It simply softened. Life slowed into something quieter, more real. Between Switzerland and California, Audrey stepped away from the chaos of Hollywood and into a rhythm that felt almost unfamiliar in its simplicity. No flashing cameras, no constant expectations, just a woman rediscovering what it meant to truly live. But beneath that quiet life, something even more profound was awakening. In the 1980s, her past began calling her back, not to the screen, but to the world. Through her work with UNICEF, Audrey returned to places marked by suffering, places that mirrored the hunger and fear she had known as a child during the war. This wasn't charity for her, it was personal. She walked through some of the harshest regions on earth, not as a star, but as a witness, speaking, listening, and carrying the stories of children the world had forgotten.
I usually go with a rather heavy heart, because I know what I'm going to see, yet I must.
Her voice, once known for delivering lines in films, now carried something far heavier: truth. The woman who once enchanted audiences on screen had become something far greater, not just a legend, but a lifeline. And in this softer, more meaningful chapter, when fame no longer defined her and compassion became her compass, someone new quietly entered her life, not with grand gestures, not with headlines, but with the kind of quiet peace she had been searching for all along. His name was Robert Wolders. By the early 1980s, Audrey Hepburn was no longer the young star rushing from one film set to the next. The glitter of Hollywood had faded into something softer, more real. In its place was a life shaped by family, reflection, and a growing devotion to humanitarian work. She had lived through love, endured heartbreak, and discovered a truth many never see: fame doesn't guarantee happiness. Then, in the stillness of that quieter life, he appeared. Robert Wolders, a Dutch actor known for his work across European and American television, lived far from the chaos that once surrounded Audrey. There was no noise about him, no need to impress, just a calm, steady presence, thoughtful, gentle, deeply respectful, the kind of man who didn't try to fill a room, but somehow made it feel safe. And for Audrey, that difference meant everything. They met around 1980, not under bright studio lights or at glamorous premieres, but through mutual friends, in a setting free from performance or pressure. What began wasn't a whirlwind romance. It was something quieter, something deeper. Their connection grew slowly, shaped by long conversations, shared understanding, and the comfort of simply being seen. For the first time in a long while, love didn't feel like a storm. It felt like peace. In a world that had once chased her every step with flashing cameras and whispered gossip, Audrey Hepburn finally found someone who saw her, not the icon, not the star, just her. Robert Wolders. He understood her in ways few ever could. Like Audrey, he carried the echoes of wartime Europe, the quiet scars of history, and a calm that made the chaos of Hollywood feel feel distant. Their connection was nothing like the stormy romances of her past. No scandalous headlines, no public drama, just quiet, unspoken understanding. Together, they wandered through the serene landscapes of Switzerland and California, their days filled with soft laughter, gentle companionship, and shared purpose as Audrey devoted herself to UNICEF. Friends noticed the change immediately. Audrey, once restless and wary, now moved through life with a serenity that hadn't been there before. Her smile lingered longer. Her eyes held a calm warmth. After decades of love complicated by fame, expectation, and heartbreak, she had discovered something extraordinary. A love that didn't demand the world. It simply existed. This was the love that came quietly, the kind that endures. Robert Walters was not just a companion, he was the anchor to her restless heart. Away from Hollywood's glare, Audrey built a life of subtle joy, family, meaningful work, and a love that whispered rather than shouted. In the end, it was a love as luminous and enduring as the woman herself, the kind that arrives softly, yet shapes a lifetime. By this point, Audrey Hepburn had weathered the storms of love more than most could imagine. The heartbreak with William Holden, the tangled years with Mel Ferrer, and the quiet disappointment of Andrea Dotti had all left their marks. Yet when Robert Walters entered her life, the rules seemed to change. There were no flashing cameras, no dramatic declarations, no tabloid chaos. With Walters, love was quiet, deliberate, almost revolutionary in its simplicity. He moved alongside her, not as a Hollywood partner craving the spotlight, but as a steady anchor, supporting her work with UNICEF, sharing in the weight of her mission, and walking beside her through the world's most fragile corners. Visitors often remarked on the rhythm of their life: unhurried meals, long walks, and soft conversations that carried the comfort of normalcy. For a woman who had lived decades under scrutiny and expectation, this calm, this ordinary intimacy felt nothing short of extraordinary. In the early 1990s, Audrey Hepburn's world dimmed beneath the shadow of illness. Yet through the quiet fear and relentless uncertainty, one figure never faltered: Robert Walters. Calm, steady, invisible to the world's eyes, he remained at her side, her constant in a life shaped by spotlight and spectacle. When Audrey passed in 1993, he was still there. Not a husband, not a headline, not a Hollywood story, just the man who had shared her final moments quietly, unwaveringly. No cameras, no drama, no fanfare, only the simple power of presence. After decades of heartbreak, fleeting romances, and fame's relentless glare, it was this quiet bond that gave her peace. Audrey's life reminds us that true love doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it simply stays. Behind the glimmering films, the awards, and the red carpets, she sought something human, something enduring. In Walters, she finally found it: a love as timeless as the woman herself. The greatest lesson of Audrey Hepburn's life? That the quietest love can be the truest, and sometimes it's the one that lingers long after the curtains fall.